What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 254 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about something that is a little different than what I usually talk about, and that is 9/11 Emergency Relief. This was a non-profit anthology comic book. All the proceeds went to the American Red Cross when this book first came out. I don't know if that is true now. If you bought a brand new copy from Amazon.com, I don't know if the proceeds would still go to the American Cross. I'm not sure how that works when a book like this, all the proceeds go to a charity or a non-profit, and then years later someone buys a brand new copy. I'm not really sure how that works out. But this is an anthology book by a whole bunch of different artists and creators as a response to the events of September 11, 2001. And this is, like I said, very different from what I usually talk about. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to the books that I was talking about a month or so ago, like Safe Area Garage and Mouse and Fun Home and Persepolis, those autobiographical comic books. It's very similar to those in that this is autobiographical stuff. A lot of this is the events of 9/11 through the lens of whichever creator is doing the short story. So, for example, there's one story in here that's about this guy who was actually in one of the towers when it was hit, and then he managed to get out. And so all of these are from the perspective of whoever is doing the comic. And it might be someone who is in Tallahassee, and then they heard about it, and it's kind of how they reacted to it. Or it might have been someone who is actually in New York, like that one story. It was someone who was actually in the first tower when it got hit, and they managed to get out. So this is very much like those comics I was talking about, those autobiographical comics, but it's a little bit more visceral because this is very intense. Now, that's not to say that the war in Sarajevo wasn't intense, but Joe Sacco, he was never actually in the middle of a combat situation. But then you have something like this where someone was actually in one of the towers that then fell down just a couple of hours after they got out. That's very, it feels very real in a way that events that are happening very far from you and you're just telling about those events through your perspective, it feels a little bit less shocking, I guess I should say. And that's not to say that the events in those other comics is not real, but it feels a little bit more close to home when you're reading it here because of how close in proximity this was to all these people who are doing these stories. I would really love to see someone who is maybe 15 years old read this book and see how they would react to this because they would not have been alive during the events of 9/11. Now, I was not quite old enough to really grasp what was going on when 9/11 happened. I was in 7th grade, so I remember it happening. I remember realizing that it was a big thing, but it took me a while to actually grasp just how big it was. I don't think I was quite emotionally mature enough to really grasp just how huge it was whenever it happened. So reading this now, it brings back memories for me of what it was like when this was going on. I remember in just about all of my classes, we just kind of stopped what we were studying at that time just to kind of talk about what this meant for us and what was going on and what we felt about it and stuff like that. And I feel like someone who's like 15 or 16, maybe even someone who's like 19 or 20, someone who is just a little tiny kid, like a 2 or 3-year-old who wouldn't even remember the events of 9/11, I would really love to see how someone that old would react to this book. Would they react to it in the same way that someone my age reacts to Pearl Harbor, where it was a real thing, it was a tragedy, but it was a million miles away. It might as well have been on another planet because that's how long ago it was. I'm wondering if someone who is that old, if they would react to this in the same way that people of my generation react to Pearl Harbor, where it's like, we know what it was and we know that people died, but it was so long ago that it doesn't affect us in the same way that 9/11 affects us. And I'm wondering if someone who is just 5 or 6 years younger than me, if they would react to this book very differently than how I react to it. But it's very difficult for me to actually talk about this book in any critical way because there are so many books here, or so many stories, and it's really difficult for me to talk about each story. But needless to say, like any anthology, some of the art styles here, I like them a lot. Some of the art styles, I don't like them quite as much. Some of the stories resonated a little bit more with me than some of the others, and that's because everyone has a different experience with something like this. So some people, they're able to channel their experience into a story that resonates with audiences a little bit better than other people are. But overall, I definitely recommend this book. I think that it is a very moving, very touching book. And like I said, I think that this would hit people who remember 9/11 and remember what it was like when that was happening. I think this would hit with them a little bit more than people who are a little bit younger than I am. But those are my thoughts thoughts on 9/11 emergency relief. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.